What happens when the world's most hunted man in psychedelic history walks free and decides to speak with us? Welcome back to Divergent States, the unofficial podcast of our Psychonaut. I'm Elite. Today's guest is William Leonard Pickard, chemist, philosopher, author of The Rose of Paracelsus, and a man who once called the Acid King. With me, as always, my co-host Brian, Marine Corps vet, mental health advocate, and the guy who keeps this show tethered to the ground when I start chasing ghosts and the myths. Brian, you ready for this one?
Oh, hell yeah, dude.
Yeah. I mean, in the 90s, he was at the center of what authorities claimed was the largest LSD operation in the world. He was sentenced to 2 life sentences. Now he's out and he's speaking to us candidly about what it all really meant. We talk about everything from the myth of Ergot wine, the commercialization of mysticism, Ibogaine therapy, ISO LSD, and what it's like to be handed a second life at nearly 80 years old. So, on a scale of shamanic reverence and the Fillmore dance floor, where do you land when it comes to psychedelics?
I'm going to go with the shaman.
the shamanic.
Yep, I'm a shaman.
Yeah, a shaman. So yeah, sometimes I think that the corporate CEO is doing sound baths before earning calls the timeline we deserve.
It's crazy that's like, what a stark difference.
It's crazy how far it's come and how, in the conversation. I think that was one of the biggest things that really it was kind of, he was underground for so many years and now he comes out and it's all press releases and press conferences. It's wild.
Yeah.
So yeah, you guys, if something in this conversation hits you, share it, screenshot it, post it, tag us, tag a friend. And that's how these stories are spread. No algorithm, no ads, just you and our people. We're on every platform at Divergent States. Hit follow, hit repost, send it to one friend who thinks they know their psychedelic history. Drop us a comment. So let's get into it. This is William Leonard Pickard, like you've never heard him before.
Oh, hell yeah, dude. Let's do it.
All right, with me back today is Leonard Pickard. Thank you, sir, for being here. It's an honor to have you.
Oh, thank you. Good to meet you.
Yeah. So just to kind of open things up, you once operated in secrecy and discipline and silence, and now everything is podcasts and panels and press releases. What do you make of this shift of visibility?
Well, it's difficult for me, having lived a life of admittedly quite clandestine, and high security every minute of every day, and suddenly being in public assemblies and speaking of materials which are highly secret, quite a structured secret society for most of my life. So it's an unusual balancing act. Only recently have I been out from under supervision by the government. And so during that time, of course, I could not address these legal issues. But let's see what we can do today.
Oh, yeah.
Lee and William Leonard Pickard.
So kind of like what I was kind of wondering a little bit starting out, what was the psychedelic landscape in the 80s and 90s from your vantage point, and how you've seen it evolve?
Well, the 80s and 90s was very similar to the 60s and 70s in terms of the landscape. It was difficult to even say the word psychedelic in an academic setting. One would consider it laughable, fringe, not worthy of consideration. And one would certainly not achieve tenure. And that situation lasted for, oh goodness, more than 40 years. It was a complete suppression of a whole area of legitimate human research that in the early days before legalization seemed to be very promising. So all was shut down for most of my life. So it's quite extraordinary in the last 5 years, primarily due to the great work of Roland Griffiths and his colleagues at Hopkins. to a large extent by Rick Doblin with the non-psychedelic MDMA, to opening federal and state doors and stirring academic interest in this field. It's an entirely whole new world, as is evidenced by the recent gathering at MAPS Denver 2025. Thousands of people congregated, many friends, kind of a hug fest. Many of the survivors of the 60s and 70s, although the numbers are dwindling, there are only a few that remember the reality of the Haight-Ashbury in the 60s and the societal transformations that occurred during those years.
Yeah. What ways have you seen the space become more mature?
Oh, vastly more mature, vastly more mature as we, as very young people in those days, in our early 20s, have become more mature, even elders, those of us that remain. But I see it becoming more mature not only in terms of chronology, simply human aging, but more mature in the sense of the wide variety of research efforts, both corporate and academic, that are now free in most governments of the world to be advanced. There are over 300 clinical trials with the name Psychedelic in them worldwide, whereas for the last few years, there were zero. That's quite a phenomenon, quite a change. It's a whole mysterious, dark world, potential medicine that was forcibly constricted. And now the gates are open. So, whatever is the truth about psychedelics, their uses, their religious, medicinal, subjectively beneficial properties, if these things are real and if they have these potential benevolent effects or not, we're going to find out the truth in the next several years. Most of us feel intuitively they have broad medical applications and certainly spiritual applications. But belief is not a clinical trial. So I'm very curious about the outcomes, for example, of not only of MindMed's MM120, which is basically just LSD tartrate for generalized anxiety disorder, but also the great work done by Beckley SciTech, by Cosmo Fielding, Rocky Fielding, sons of the recently deceased and beloved Amanda Fielding. It's kind of the Wild West presently, with all the corporate entities entering the space and making claims for the application of every known psychedelic to every known psychiatric malady, even marital problems and obesity and postpartum depression. Of course, all psychedelics are not applicable to all medical issues. Some may be useful for some things. Psilocybin is a good example for depression, but certainly not a panacea for all man's ills. So it's a great sorting out of the next few years. Who will burn through their initial funds? Who will survive? It's been a winter since 2023 in terms of commercial investment, corporations, and what have you. Even as unusual things have proliferated on the underground. I, as a young man, we only saw LSD as the principal psychoactive component. Now, of course, the community is split into various tribes, ranging from Ibogaine to 5-methoxy-DMT. Dare I say it, to Salvinorin A, a really, truly exotic, strange little compound that lasts about 15 minutes. So each has their adherents and proselytizers. I think the underlying, in many cases, the underlying subjective effects share a similar spirit. I think there's possibly great benefit involving the very short-term acting 5-methoxy-DMT, bufo, the toad, the synthetic version, of course. LSD, the parent compound, although not discussed as much as psilocybin, still retains enormous promise for alcoholism and general insight. Ibogaine, of course, is full of rich anecdotal material, extraordinary anecdotal material beyond anything I've ever seen regards to any other drug. in terms of its promise for healing of addiction. And more broadly, not simply fentanyl addicts or meth addicts, but the healing of trauma in general, not just drug induced trauma, but physical trauma, psychic trauma, childhood trauma, women's issues. It's not a recreational compound. You don't go dancing on it, although in small doses, people do in Ghana and West Africa. But an extraordinary material that seems to access the deepest portions of our emotional history.
Yeah, I find Ibogaine fascinating myself. I talked to Tom Fiegel a lot about it in his clinic down in Mexico. It was really enlightening. It was cool to hear about it, how he's doing it.
Well, I've had the pleasure of actually visiting Cancun last month and visited with Tom and Talia, and actually just spoke with Talia this morning. And I have had the privilege of interviewing all of the CEOs of the principal clinics in Mexico and Portugal and Brazil. And among the clinics, although, of course, the great work by Martine Polanco at Mission Within and by Jonathan Dickinson in Tijuana by Ambio Bio are very excellent with regards to healing of our warfighters. For the broader public and for the quality of the onboarding procedures and the cardio assays and the blood work done by Beyond is exceptional. I have to ascribe their facility and the treatment protocols as among the best, if not the best. Fortunately, there are many players in the space, and the ones with a few exceptions, the CEOs I've talked to in the Mexican clinics and Brazil, Portugal, have great heart about this, all of them. They feel that's a drug of some miraculous properties. It is a true healing gift. And they may be right. But again, we need clinical trials to separate the enthusiasm from the reality. And perhaps there is no separation, which would be quite wonderful.
Kind of along those lines, do you think that the current wave of psychedelic advocates really understand the gravity of what they're handling?
That's a tough question, one I've never been asked before. We, of course, are seeing mainstreaming where lots of people are coming in, lots of new names. You see the enthusiasm that's kind of ascribed to Christianity in a way, and the early Christians shouted from the rooftops. People become very enthusiastic. So one has to be careful about newbie bias, if you will. But things settle down after a number of psychedelic experiences. 6 months or a year or so later, one gains a greater perspective, perhaps becomes more moderated in one's view. I see a number of opportunists entering the field. I worry about the monetization protocols of it all. I realize people have to make a living and all that. I'm happy to see about the ceremonial use. I think that's probably a great thing. When we when we had to hide, which is the last 50 years, ceremonial use, if it existed at all, was of course very quiet. You didn't want a police raid. Now ceremonial use is becoming far more public, and it's on the net, and retreats popping up all over the world, and single individuals administering 5-hydroxy to every couple of hours to a new individual all over the world in small groups. And psilocybin therapists, often self-proclaimed, hosting ceremonies. And I think that it's good that it's proliferating. And it's good that the therapists are, by and large, good-hearted and experienced and treating their patients carefully. But it is an interesting phenomenon to see the shift from, in the old days, if you wanted to turn a person on, here's a bag of mushrooms. Go and may it treat you well. Walk into the forest. And off they would go with a friend or someone experienced and do that sort of thing. Now, it's if you want this substance, then we will administer it to you, and we're going to have a sound bath and a lecture about the properties of it. And you're going to lie upon the floor, possibly close your eyes with mask and so forth, with all sorts of music. And it's going to be a very pleasant afternoon. And from that, one may gain insight, and it may be very helpful. So the structure surrounding the administration of these materials has changed radically. And for the most part, I think for the good, because of the intentional use. We're going to go in this extraordinary experience and fix something. We want to learn something about the reasons for our smoking. We want to learn something about the difficulties in our human relationships. That's far better than simply say, let's pop a pill and go downtown to the Fillmore. But then again, there's a sense of freedom in letting the individual discuss or describe or to explore on their own without any guidance, without any instruction, without any control, without any substantial fee for the entire ceremony. Just trust in the innate properties of the material and trust into the friendship circles of experienced individuals that can walk with the individual in the forest.
We'll be right back.
Psychedelics can take you deep, but you don't have to go at it alone. Fireside Project is your trusted companion on the psychedelic path. If you're having a tough trip, their free anonymous support line is just a call or text away at 62-FIRESIDE. Planning a journey? Fireside certified coaches offer personalized video sessions to help you prepare and integrate, starting with a free 20-minute consult. Whether you're on the path, in the middle of it, or just getting started, Fireside is here for you. Learn more at firesideproject.org. Now, I was going to say, do you see a danger in separating psychedelics from the mysticism entirely?
Separating from the mysticism? I'm not sure if it can be separated from mysticism. One of my favorite memories is a young person at a great corporate conference where the major psychedelic organizations were raising hundreds of millions of dollars. It was all VCs in their suits. And a young person, a young girl, just quietly asked me, what about the sacred? And it occurred to me that perhaps that sort of thing has been lost as the accountants look at the bottom line, as they must. And it's easy, and circling back to your original question, it's easy to forget the fundamental power and spirituality inherent in these compounds blows away all the materialist approaches to it. I realize that the great corporations and their syntheses in China, or their requirement to adhere to FDA standards and good manufacturing practices and hire chief scientific officers, and all of that require a financial structuring that's quite standard in the pharmaceutical industry, with the novelty of the properties of these compounds thrown in. But I often wonder, and you hit the nail on the head in your earlier question, I often wonder if the CEOs or the leaders, in treating this like a novel pharmaceutical, have somewhat missed the essential point and have no experience with it themselves and can talk the talk and recite papers, but they may lack a sense of reverence because they've never been there. And that worries me a bit. The good news, the good news is the major groups, Atai, Compass, what have you, initially were formed by affluent 30, 40, 50-ish individuals that had been there and knew what was up and had that sense of respect. So we haven't seen these founders replaced entirely by CEOs out of Wharton that never have and never will because they're afraid of it. Take a class 1 psychedelic. That's a good one.
Yeah, I kind of along the same lines says, do you think the language around psychedelics has become too safe and sanitized?
Well, I think part of the mainstreaming, and I think part of certainly the federal government approval, the line items in the defense bill allocating tens of millions of dollars to these studies, I think that was necessary to de-wild, if you will, psychedelics, bring them from excited West Coast dancing in the moonlight scenarios and into a more rigid scientific and medical framework where awkward, unfortunate effects are sometimes seen when people are improperly vetted. To admit that, um, to not to temper the enthusiasm about the promise, to try to produce a more balanced, scientific, staid, rigorous approach. But you're only talking about a medical treatment for, say, depression. You're not talking about what happens to a normal individual who is not sick emotionally and takes this material just to go exploring, has no intention to cure themselves of anything, has no intention to resolve neurosis, is not depressed. What about that person, which is most people? What about the 99%? Is that okay? Does one have to be sick to take a psychedelic now? I realize that we've created a medical and corporate framework to appease FDA and government entities, where yes, you can take this material if you present with a treatment-resistant depression. But if you're just a normal human who wants to walk in the moonlight or by the ocean with a friend or see the glory of the forest, then that's not permissible. So I think we've created a dichotomy because of the necessary medicalization protocols where we've forgotten the 99%. We've forgotten the freedom, the human freedom to do with our minds and bodies, as we wish up to a point. We've forgotten the beauty of having the freedom to dance in the moonlight, and that it's okay and outside government control, and no one can tell you not to do it. Those aren't being addressed.
Yeah, I like it. It's true. Yeah, I think that's even our culture is kind of moving away from that. Everything's becoming more sanitized and more, compartmentalized. Where in the past we are much more feral, I guess is what I would say.
Mm-hmm.
So just kind of shifting gears a little bit. See, do you think? Let's do another one. Let's try. Has being mythologized ever made it harder to be understood?
You mean psychedelics?
Yeah, I mean, just you as a person in general. It seems in the psychedelic world.
I don't know how to respond to that. I don't. I may have made a practice since 2000 of never reading anything online or articles or anything. So I don't. I don't dig through media, or I'm not even aware of it unless someone tells me. That creates a much calmer life. I'm not pushed or pulled by various opinions here and there, or often inaccurate reporting. My life is peaceful, and I'd rather not get into public brawls over positions on this or that. I don't. When I comment on LinkedIn or the rare social media, it's usually a statement of praise for a piece of work or a researcher that I admire. I don't get into debating the ethics or the morality or the FDA closure of the great efforts by MAPS. I try to adhere to the community standards that were set in the 60s, which is we're all in this together. It's a worldwide brotherhood and sisterhood. We've got enough problems with oppressive government with guns and prisons than to start battling against ourselves. And we should be tolerant of each other. We all who have seen the light of a million suns, that's a rare group of people. And so with that in mind, not to nitpick or challenge or, put another person down, that sort of thing. We've got a much bigger opposition than just us little hippies.
That's very true. So, what part of your story do you think that people never really ask, but they should?
Well, I tend to talk about it a little bit at conferences these days. Generally, the questions I'm asked are all about prison. And I can tell all sorts of war stories of, bloodbath and that sort of thing and the pain of it. But, you can see that sort of thing on YouTube. There's a ton of prison movies and stories. So you get an idea of what it's like, although the visceral feeling of fear is not present. But no one really asks about, and if I were a young person, I'd want to know. No one really asks of what's it like? What's it like being in a laboratory with 100 million doses? What's it like being alone out there and responsible for that? What do you do? What do you think about in the morning? How do you go through your day? Yeah, you can't find on YouTube. There's no movies made about it so far. So that's what I'd want to know. But maybe this podcast is not the time to do it.
I'm here as long as you want. So, yeah. Kind of along these same lines we're talking about, what's a small joy you hold on to now? Like something quiet or ordinary or meaningful?
Oh, yes, very much so. The small joy, well, I mean, of course, just the joy of waking up in good health. I'll be 80 in a few months, just waking up in freedom on a glorious day and good health. I'm often say thanks to the universal spirit or God or what do you like to call it. Thanks for health and thanks for many friends and thanks for family and the health of the family. Thanks for exciting work, meaningful work. Just a profound feeling of gratitude. It just wells up and overflows from within me. It's this little life I've got now, these few years before me. Didn't have to happen. It's a second life. I thought I would, and many people did, most people did, thought I would die in prison. I did every day for 20 years. So it's like being given a second life. I mean, like being born again in a Christian sense. And the question is then, of course, I have to ask myself what to do. What do you do? And if you were captive for decades and suddenly are not, what do you do with that second life? I suppose one might think one might run amok in the pleasures of the world. I'm in LA right now on a visit handling some matters, and I walked down Santa Monica Boulevard last night, which has changed quite a lot since I saw it last a quarter of a century ago. And just little bar after bar after bar, tiny bars like in Amsterdam, just with pounding music, different venues, and all sorts of unusual things going on. And I thought how easy it would be and for many young people, probably a routine, how easy it would be to be lost in those many worlds of sensory pleasures, enormous amount of food, enormous amount of sex, constant music, just deeply into all the gifts of the world. But I feel this second life, I prefer to approach it in a more sober manner without being dull about it. So the question is, I ask myself, is what can I do? What can I personally do? How to conduct oneself in the world? What can I do to repay back this great gift, or just for a few years more of the freedom?
That's yeah. Is there any kind of moments of kindness from someone unexpected that stayed with you?
You mean from the past? From prison, you mean? Or
For any time.
Oh, yeah, I see it all the time. I mean, I see gestures of kindness throughout the day.
Yeah, it is very nice to be you seem very in the moment and in the present. So I imagine you see it quite often.
I see it everywhere I turn, just walking down the street, a glimpse of an individual's face. It doesn't have to be a young, pretty person. It could be very old, very fat. It could be a destitute person, just people that are quite different from my walk of life. And, I could see it in a child's face. The world, if you stop to look at it a little bit, can be very beautiful with its own tragedies as well. So I'm quite familiar with tragedies. But I also see the beauty of it everywhere I go. And it's very humbling. Very humbling. I woke up this morning. I'm in, I stay in various hotels and what have you due to my occupations. And 2 weeks ago, I was at the Oslo Freedom Forum at the Grand Hotel, paid for by some billionaire, the most beautiful hotel you've ever seen, with lovely parks and the beauty of Oslo and outdoor cafes and what have you. And now, as here speaking to you, I'm in a dive motel in Los Angeles, one of the most burned out, bombed out sections imaginable. It's extremely cheap. And I walk outside my doors and there's crack fiends and you name it, walking around out there. So I woke up this morning to, some old, large, destitute person wrapped up in a blanket crashed in front of a downtrodden Arby's, just sitting on a bench. And that's what I woke up to this morning, looking for a hot beverage. But then last night, I'm driving into LA to meet with a lovely individual into the best part of Beverly Hills, and there's all sorts of cafes and young, beautiful people everywhere. And I'm driving along in the car, and the Doors came on the public radio station. You don't hear the Doors very often on public radio, and it was just perfect for LA with all its pictures of the film industry and what have you around. There's Morrison singing. So there's lots of changes wherever I go. I wasn't able to travel for, of course, 20 years at gunpoint and then the last 4 years on satellite. And a few months ago, the government let me go finally and gave me a passport. So I have several jobs and it allows me to travel, remote jobs. And so I've been speaking abroad. I've been to Iceland twice in the last few months, speaking at psychedelic conferences. Costa Rica twice, speaking at human rights conferences. So a lot of that going on. I meet a lot of people and embrace a lot of people and vice versa. Never tire of it. It's like a great gift. So
That's, yeah, it's always, I mean, yeah, just kind of reflect back and see how far as you've talked, throughout, and just how far you've come, and going from thinking you're gonna die in a cell to, you're, I mean, even like I said, when Santa Monica, something walking down Santa Monica Boulevard, something you probably never thought would happen again. Um, did anything new emerge in your thinking while you were incarcerated? Something that would have never come from freedom?
Well, life before prison was extremely fast lane. You're dealing with these planetary scale quantities, and then that you have to move about the world and safely and all that. And so that lifestyle of hiding in remote laboratories is quite an exotic lifestyle. So it's very fast in a way. But in prison, you slow it down. 1 second becomes 1,000 years. Time twists and dissipates, and there's just a vacuum of the heart, vacuum of hope that goes. There's a great nothingness. But there are teachings that occur that could not be, perhaps not obtained in other ways easily. The fast lane's gone. One is terribly isolated. And I speak of this often in public appearances. That you learn what really means the most to oneself. And that is not what has taken away. What's taken away is your job, assuming you had a job. All possessions are gone. Many friends are gone. A few new ones are made. From being able to travel to Moscow tomorrow if one wished to only being able to walk 40 or 50 feet with permission of a guard through metal detectors and round in small circles endlessly. Enormous change from being able to do anything to being able to do nothing. Sense of enormous disempowerment. So one learns what is left, what is most meaningful. I often talk about this publicly. And that's merely the love of one's family and friends. And that is sorely, sorely tested by imprisonment. It's hard for them, but that's all there is when all else is blown away. That's a good lesson in a sense. It's a very human lesson. It reminds oneself that status, money, privilege, and education, socioeconomy, cars and homes, and all possessions mean nothing compared to a simple flame in the heart of a loved one that you can still see through 30-foot walls.
What would you say surprised you the most about yourself during your time away?
Endurance, surviving it. People do give up. I was spared that, but I've seen it in many men. One thing that helped me personally was studying the law and getting up every day and filing motions and fighting the fight. We're going to file a motion. We're going to turn this case around. We're going to get a new trial. This goes on for years and years and years and years. It went on every day for 20 years. I filed 1,000 motions. So just fighting the good fight helps a lot. But if you don't have that, if you don't have that something to hang on to that empowers you somewhat, something you do, get home to your family, you don't have that. I think most men, at least in maximum security where I was, didn't have that. They just sort of say, okay, I'm done. And they watch TV all day long, or they get into heroin use, or walk around like zombies. And that's really scary to see that happen to a grown man. It's like watching an old lion die in a zoo, pacing back and forth. You can see it in their eyes. Yeah.
So if this wasn't a podcast and we are just kind of two people hanging out over tea, what would you want to say that hasn't been said?
Well, I'd just like to thank you, Lee, and for asking some questions. I didn't expect today to get into the emotional end of it, but it seems to naturally happen. Thank you for allowing me to once again reflect on which way is up. I hope that your listeners and people that have survived to this podcast this far find something memorable and helpful to them personally, and perhaps our little conversation.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great. I mean, yeah, we've got our Psychonaut. So it's the largest forum in the world dedicated to the responsible use of psychedelics. So we've got over 500,000 members there. So hopefully they'll hear some of this too. Yeah, I've got a few questions from them if you'd be willing to answer a couple of these.
Sure.
A good one. What's his name? Lysergio Demetrius. I wanted to know, did you ever isolate alkaloids in ergot wine?
Ergot wine does not really exist. That is a myth created by the girlfriend of the government witness that did me in.
Yeah.
And without naming names, and I don't really want to go there in this discussion. The girlfriend produced a pretty popular small book about 2012 or so, when I could not speak to the case publicly. For me, there was zero comment publicly for the entire 20 years. But said girlfriend hopped into the silence while assisting her boyfriend and the government, and published this little book. And ergot wine came from the following. Might find this intriguing. I don't really speak of it publicly. Okay. So prior to having me arrested, This individual had access to a stored laboratory which he had stolen and gotten under his control. And within that laboratory were witnessed several large drums of byproducts from various labs through the years. But he didn't have he'd stolen all this and didn't have the instruments to analyze it, but thought it might be valuable. So he assembled the girlfriend and many young people. By that I mean 17, 18, 19 in the Midwest, and took some drops out of these large containers and put it into wine. And he befuddled them or misled them, saying, "This is Ergot wine." What it was, of course, was simply a bottle of wine with a few milliliters of liquid containing the rather wretched byproducts of some synthesis years earlier. No doubt some LSD in it, but also iso-LSD, lysergic acid, acetonitrile, and various other strange things. But he wanted to do this to determine if this large drum was of value and could be distributed. And so in my view, the young people were merely guinea pigs. So this was recorded in the book the girlfriend wrote, in a chapter, I think, named Ergot Wine or ALD 52 or something like that. But it's purely a myth. There is no Ergot wine. If there were, it'd be extremely dangerous.
It's actually a pretty funny story. You think about it, this whole story, and it's just byproduct.
Yes, that's fine.
I have my own theory on that. Like, I think a lot of the kind of the negative effects you get when people say, oh, it was dirty acid or something. A lot of it's the iso-LSD and stuff that wasn't cleaned properly. So,
well, it's true. The interesting thing about syntheses, and there are any number of small batches being made with an impure product, and crudely, the larger scale people, of course, are different on that. But iso-LSD is produced in many chemical approaches, not all of them. And it has no effect, really, if you took it alone. When mixed with the actual compound, it seems to flatten out the experience of, saying, having hundreds of thoughts simultaneously. You get this very dull psychedelic wash of no distinction, and that's the presence of a considerable amount of iso-LSD in there. Itself, if you took it by itself, iso would have no effect, but it does seem to moderate the real stuff.
Well, that's great. I kind of feel like that we really kind of got over his little question on that. So major caps. He says many psychonauts feel they interact with intelligent beings on different planes, whether we described as spiritual or alien or something else. Have you ever had such an experience? And if so, what impact did they have on you, or what would you suggest people process these types of experiences?
Well, yes, I'm interacting with intelligence being on multiple planes as we speak. Not only you, but to the person that asked that question. I tend to keep things in the human realm. I prefer to talk to people in all walks of life, children to old ladies to incredibly talented individuals beyond my capacities. But they're all human, and they're all here on this planet. I don't speak to machine elves or spirits with no name, or any of the possible phantasmagoria that are created in the neurological cinema from taking this drug or that drug or what have you. I think those are curiosities and all that stuff, but I wouldn't waste one's time talking to beings that aren't human.
I totally relate on that. It's kind of my personal point of view on it.
There were a few in prison that weren't human, but that's another subject.
Right. Yeah, I tend to describe myself as a naturalist or physicalist. So last one, the guy's name is Star Trek Wook Life.
What's that last name? I missed it.
Star Trek Wook Life.
Wook.
Yeah. Said, ask him if there's any truth to the theory that the writer's room of Star Trek The Next Generation was taking his acid and named Captain Picard after him. The timeline seems to match up, but nobody's ever been able to confirm it as far as I can tell.
Well, not to my knowledge. I think there was just coincidence, but I can recall hearing about that in 92, 93, and goodness, game was on in those years, and things were all over the place. So it's quite possible that Gene Roddenberry, as some of the writers, had a real sense of humor. But I think it's merely coincidence, although a fun coincidence.
Yeah, I thought it was a really interesting question. I feel like that would be kind of a cool answer to find out if that could be confirmed or not.
Just Stewart, I think he's a great actor. But
me too. Yeah. Stick around. I gotta. Thank you for your time. We got a few questions. Maybe we could hang out and talk for just the Patreon section in 10,
we can
15
do that.
minutes.
Let's do that.
Yeah. And so, William Leonard Pickard, thank you for your voice, your candor, and your time. For those listening, the Rose of Paracelsus. Is that correct?
No, Paracelsus.
Paracelsus. Okay. I got to get better with my Greek.
And Picard, like Jean-Luc.
Oh, yeah. William Leonard Pickard, thank you for your voice, your candor, and your time. For those listening, the Rose of Paracelsus. I will be back for the bonus section on Patreon. You guys stick around. We'll be talking a little more, just having fun. William, thanks again for staying a little longer.
Then thanks again, Lee. Thank you, everyone.
That was William Leonard Pickard, chemist, mystic, survivor, a man whose story forces us to rethink everything we know about this space. If you believe in conversations like this, help us keep it going, follow the show, drop a rating, share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. So you think we'll ever get a Netflix series out of this guy's life?
Dude, it's definitely worthy. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, just
it'd be like a psychedelic Breaking Bad.
Dude, 2 life sentences, bro.
Yeah, I want to say it was like 2 kilograms of LSD. Like they tried to get, it was crazy amounts.
Yeah.
So, was there anything that you would have asked Picard that I didn't?
Probably, I guess, how to make the best prison wine.
Yeah, that would have actually been a pretty good question. I wonder
how can I make hooch in case I ever find myself.
Yeah, that would have been a great one. What is Leonard Picard's prison wine recipe?
Dude, that's or just like 5 tips to maintain your emotional center when facing life in prison.
I mean, both of them. That would have been a great. Now I feel like there's a lost opportunity.
Well, it sounds like we're going to be talking with him more in the future, right?
Yeah. I've been chatting with him. I saw him several times at Psychedelic Science. Got his number. We've been, texting and chatting back and forth, which is freaking surreal to me. But
yeah,
you know what? It's awesome.
Because he's a big influence for you, right?
Oh God, yeah. I read his story. As I told him, I read his story, 25 years ago, and just was obsessed with it. It was real exciting to get to sit down and talk to him a little bit. Everybody, thanks for listening. Remember, most people never get a second chance. The real story is what you do with it. If this resonated with you, share this with another supporter or jump into the comments. We're always listening. If you've got guest ideas, just want to say hi, we're at Divergent States everywhere. Thanks for walking with us through this one, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Yeah, catch you guys later.